Today, I want to help you understand what happens if you default on a land contract. Well, by the end of this video, you're going to have a clear understanding of the legal and financial ramifications of defaulting on a land contract, the processes that follow, and strategies to mitigate risk. Did you know that defaulting on a land contract could potentially lead to losing the property outright and lose all the money that you've invested, even without the foreclosure protections that come when you deal with a traditional bank? Let me break this down for you by first explaining what a land contract is. Second, what are the disadvantages and advantages of a land contract? And finally, let you know what happens if you default on a land contract. If you're ready, let's go. So a land contract is a legal agreement for a seller finance purchase that doesn't involve banks or traditional financing. It's really putting the buyer and seller together where the buyer makes periodic payments to the seller. Now, a land contract is also called a bond for title or contract for deed. Because there's no bank or traditional lender, a land contract is cheaper and the process is so much faster than getting a traditional mortgage. And because there's no bank involved, the buyer and seller negotiate with each other and they come up with the purchase price, the interest rate, periodic payments, and everything else involved. And in a traditional land contract, the seller retains legal ownership until the final payment is made in that contract. So what is the angle for a buyer, and why would you ever utilize a land contract if you're a buyer? Well, number one, if you are a buyer who doesn't have a down payment saved up to put into a purchase of a home, or maybe your credit isn't where it needs to be able to get traditional financing, a land contract is a fantastic option. Maybe you've been in a situation where you've been through a foreclosure or a short sale and your credit is really damaged and there doesn't look like there's any opportunity for you to get a traditional loan, but you want to own a home. A land contract can do that for you. And you can actually get into a home with no down payment and with no credit check whatsoever, depending on the seller that you're dealing with. So what about a seller? When would you utilize a land contract? Well, number one, with a seller, if you're utilizing any seller financing strategy, you're gonna potentially pull more people out of the woodwork that are sitting on the sidelines because they don't have to deal with traditional bank. If you've ever dealt with traditional financing, you know how cumbersome and tiresome it can become. Here's the other thing, land contracts really are advantageous to the seller, way more so than the buyer, because the seller can act as the landlord. Because the buyer's buying the home, they're responsible for all the maintenance, the repairs, the taxes, the insurance, and the seller can act as the landlord, meaning that the seller doesn't have to worry about a lot of those things like maintenance and repairs. But here's the absolute best thing if you're a seller in a land contract, is if the buyer defaults any payment or defaults on the land contract whatsoever, the seller has the ability to evict the buyer from the property and not go through a foreclosure process. That means to you as a buyer, if you default on it, then you might potentially lose the property and all the money you've paid for a period of time. So going through a scenario, let's say that you're a buyer entered into a land contract, you're 5 years into this process, you've made every payment for 5 years, and you're supposed to be able to traditionally finance this home a few years down the road, but you stop making payments because of any situation, the seller could evict you and keep all of your payments from the previous 5 years and retain the property and not have to go through any foreclosure process. They can just evict you from the property. So that's probably the biggest challenge and dangerous thing. And I always tell everybody, if you're doing a land contract, I would highly recommend utilizing an attorney who understands land contracts specific for the state that you live in. So if you default on a land contract, you are potentially in a situation where you lose your equitable title. Now, this is something important to understand. With a land contract, the buyer has what's called equitable title, but the seller has legal title, and that doesn't switch over until the final payment is made. And within a land contract, there's many times a balloon payment, which means at a certain period of time down the road, the buyer has to pay off the remaining balance of the mortgage either through traditional financing or money they've saved up. Most of the time it's through traditional financing once they've built up their credit and made enough money or saved up enough money for a down payment. But if you default on a land contract as a buyer, you can potentially lose the property and all the money you paid up to that point. Now, land contracts can be an amazing tool for both a buyer and seller. You just got to understand all of the ramifications that go into it. And there's strategies where people utilize land contracts like slow flips. There's a strategy that I've come up with that is similar to a slow flip that's called cash flow flipping. And it is working in this market like a charm. It works in any market, and it requires little to no money out of your pocket. And if you want to understand how to fully utilize this strategy and do it step by step, I've written a book called Cash Flow Flipping. And I'm giving that book away to you, no charge, no obligation. Just click on the link below, cashflowflipping.com. Thanks for stopping by. Have an amazing day.